yesterday, who perhaps was the first celebrity pastor. 1521, the trade in Luther posters takes off in Europe. He is the first celebrity. But Luther has this, when he returns to Wittenberg in 1522, he preaches this famous sermon. In it, he's explaining how the Reformation was successful. He says, I was asleep, I was sitting in the pub, I apologize to the Baptists, but I was sitting in the pub drinking beer, and the word was out there doing it all. Now he's making a smart aleck quip in some ways, but he's also emphasizing the fact that really it was nothing to do with me and my person. It was ultimately the word of God that did it. And so my hope and prayer is that the very influential pastors of very large churches do everything they can to minimize themselves. Church history is not great in showing how one big pastor is succeeded by another pastor. Right. And I suppose if I can add one last point as well, the aspirational model, I think, connects to the intrusion of worldly categories of success as opposed to faithful categories. When Paul in 1 Timothy is wrestling with the fact that he's about to pass away and the apostles are going away, and he writes to Timothy, he doesn't say to Timothy, the way to safeguard Christian teaching and Christian behavior for the next generation is to find another 12 really charismatic guys to carry the message forward. What he says is, find yourself some ordinary guys who are respected in the church, respected in their communities. If they're married, they should have brought up their families well, and they should be able to teach. There are more than a dozen guys in this country who can preach the gospel.
Amen. No doubt.
It's disturbing the same dozen names turn up at every conference. Preaching the gospel is not rocket science. If it was, Paul would have said so. He says, find ordinary guys who are reputable and respectable and faithful and can teach. And that's how the church will be saved for the next generation. So probably talk
very
too long.
Helpful, Carl. No, that's good.
And Peter's writings to the early church that they're strangers and aliens. How you achieve that, how you try to follow that, even if you become successful and prosperous, is a difficult thing. Does it mean you always have to keep kind of moving, leaving somewhere and setting up again so that you're always kind of in exile? That's not what it means. It does mean, of course, I think in part, trying to be to serve God, to glorify God, to love God and neighbor, but to let that be the guiding motive and not let success in the world be what you want to accomplish. So consumerism, worldly advance in some ways, seeking wealth and riches and fame, those are things that a Pilgrim People doesn't do. And in some ways, I guess that seems obvious. I think it meant, and this goes back to Machen and the kind of stands that he took, it meant not trying to gain fame and influence at the expense of being firm in your convictions, resolute in your statements, taking a stand when there's a controversy, not avoiding it or evading it for the sake of maintaining your position. If you need to be a Pilgrim People in that case, fine, so be it. And in fact, it may be much more often the case that you need to be a Pilgrim People than to actually gain the praise of the world. So it's a way of preparing people that you're not necessarily going to be rich and famous if you become a Christian